Welcome back to the channel. This is Holden from Classroom Camp, and in this video, I'm going to discuss restorative practices. If you've never heard of restorative practices, that's okay because I'm going to break it all down here for you and hopefully inspire teachers as well as school leaders to reconsider how restorative practices are actually used in schools. And quickly, before we begin, remember, if you like this video, hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. You don't have to, but I would love to have you here as part of the Classroom Camp community. So, what are restorative practices? First, we're going to take a look at a definition from the Learning Policy Institute. On their website, it says many schools use exclusionary disciplines such as suspensions and expulsions with the intention of reducing misbehavior and improving school safety. However, research shows that the use of exclusionary discipline ultimately increases misbehavior, undermines school climate, reduces achievement, and increases dropout and incarceration rates. In addition, long-standing research documents the disproportionate use of punitive discipline practices for students of color and students with disabilities. As an alternative, many schools have sought to replace harsh disciplinary policies with restorative practices. Basically, what is believed is that exclusionary practices, which essentially exclude children from school, suspending them, expelling them, anything like that, is harmful to students. It is believed that if you suspend students from school, they're most likely going to end up on the streets, getting into trouble, doing no good, and it's best to just keep them inside schools and restore them in some way with restorative practices. Continuing on, restorative practices are designed to build a strong sense of community in schools, to teach interpersonal skills, to repair harm when conflict occurs, and to proactively meet students' needs, including those that result from trauma in or outside of school, so misbehavior is less common. Instead of punishment, restorative practices address school discipline by focusing on developing communication strategies and building relationships. Among restorative practices are classroom meetings, community building circles, and conflict resolution strategies that all adults and students use. Additionally, restorative practices include mediation strategies that can be used to resolve disagreements, help students make amends, and support students' re-entry to the school community after a challenge has occurred. One of the most basic examples of restorative practice that I have seen is simply having a student write an apology letter to a teacher. Let's say that a student is misbehaving in class, causing chaos, and maybe even says something hurtful or disrespectful to the teacher. A restorative practice might be having them sit aside and write an apology letter to that teacher or whoever was offended in this case. Sometimes that could even include writing an apology letter to the classroom. Another example cited in this paragraph here is having a community circle. So if your class is out of control and there are a lot of issues going on in the classroom, maybe there are disagreements between students, maybe just behavior is, or the culture is just a negative culture in your classroom, you might decide to just have students sit in a circle in your classroom. A teacher facilitates a discussion, and you just all not really hash it out, but discuss what is really going on in the issue and work towards a restorative solution. Restorative practices have become very common in schools with high dropout rates, and especially those with many students of low socioeconomic status, because school leaders believe that these types of practices are less likely to lead students down the school to prison pipeline. And while I do agree with restorative practices to some extent, I have some criticisms that I want to point out here in this video. My first criticism of restorative practices is that I don't believe they are a one-size-fits-all solution for all students. I believe that they can be useful in some cases, but for schools that lean on restorative practices as their main way to address behavior in schools, I think they don't do a good enough job of disciplining students. I think that students need other types of discipline. For example, I have a lot of students that they misbehave in class, they go and write an apology letter, they give it to me and say, "I'm sorry, Mr. Harris," and then the next day they're doing the exact same thing in my class, misbehaving just like nothing ever happened. And I simply don't think that these practices are enough. There needs to be some other consequence, and this could be detention. It could be after school detention, Saturday detention, some extra work, or something to do in the community. I think that restorative practices alone do not solve all of the problems for all students. They do work with some students. For sure, there are those students that they act up in class and, hey, I can phone home and tell their parent or whatever the case is, and they come back with an apology letter that their parent made them write, and I never see any misbehavior from them again. It works for some students, and that's great, but it does not work for all students, especially for those repeat offenders that just know the system and they know that, hey, I can apologize and just go back to what I'm doing. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work very well for those types of students. Another criticism that I have is that I believe that, like I kind of said in my first point, is that restorative practices need to be used in conjunction with other forms of discipline. You cannot just use restorative discipline as your main strategy for addressing misbehavior. You need to make sure that you have other systems in place, things to deter students from misbehaving. In my case, I have had to, even though I do use restorative discipline, I have also had to implement a lot of times my own recess detention. And unfortunately, that cuts into my lunchtime because that's also when I'm having lunch when students are having recess. But out of just feeling like I don't have other support, I've had to use recess detention during my lunchtime to get something, to hold something against students. And a lot of times that recess detention is making up work because my belief is, hey, if you play in class, then you're not playing at recess. If you're not doing your work in class, you're going to be doing it at recess. That's kind of my philosophy on that. And so I do pull students in for recess detention sometimes to make up work that they failed to do in class because they were causing chaos. But I don't think that teachers should be responsible for that. I don't think that I should have to do that. I think that the school needs its own discipline system set up and cannot just rely on restorative practices because, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and you have to address different students differently. And like I said, teachers cannot, this responsibility cannot be solely teachers, which is my third point, that teachers need assistance with this. Restorative practice should not be the responsibility of teachers. And if you're going to use restorative practices, you need to have everyone on board. There was a time when we had a professional development, we had a workshop or / meeting where people came in and discussed restorative practices, and I never heard anything about it again. I don't think that that's enough for a school just to have one little workshop on it and then, all right, just do your restorative practices. That doesn't work. Teachers, yes, we do need to use restorative practices, but I think that we need strong leadership and strong disciplinarians who can front that effort and who can lead those restorative practice efforts. And if you're not going to give students suspension or you're not going to give them detention, then you need to have them doing some community service or something. Because yes, community service, or if they're destroying the school, maybe they're chipping away at the paint, they are getting the lunchroom dirty, you need to have disciplinarians who are willing to take the time to have students clean up that lunchroom or to have them paint the walls of the school building or whatever the case is that they need to be restored and learn a lesson from. But anyways, those are just some of my thoughts on restorative discipline. So hopefully you learned exactly what they are, as well as some of the ideas that me, from the perspective of a teacher, have. Well, let me know what you think. Leave your comments down in the comment section below. What do you think about restorative discipline, restorative practices? Do they work? And make sure, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this kind of content. That's all I have for you in this video. See you in the next one.